Welcome back, my alcoholic YouTubers. All right, so in this video I want to talk about bugling too much, when to bugle, and not bugling enough. So one thing I want to say is we as hunters have been doing something wrong for the longest time, but we as hunters have just been pursuing and calling, pursuing, calling. So we haven't really been acting like elk. So we've been acting like humans, and that's where, calling too much or not calling enough plays a big factor. So understanding these elk's behavior is very important. Hopefully make you understand when to call and when not to call. Let's think about this. Why would a bull elk bugle, okay? Or elk make sounds year-round? They call to let other elk know where they're at. Now during the rut, letting other elk know, telling other elk where he's at, and if he is the dominant one in that area, warning other bulls and telling them to stay away because he's the dominant one. The big question is, when is calling too much too much? When there are no elk around, you can call as much as you want. It just doesn't matter. They're not going to care. Nobody's going to care. And you can make all the sounds you want. That's probably when you can call as many times or as much as you want. When you see elk, let's say 300 plus yards, and you're bugling to them and they're not answering you back, so that should tell you automatically that the elk's behavior in that area is very shy. And so you have to close the distance. And when you close the distance, you can't give loud bugles. Okay, you have to act accordingly to their behavior in that area. Whatever pressure they have had up to that day has made them react that way. So your calls are going to have to be quiet or softer, but also with the right meaning. Here's an example. My friend and I got this bull to bugle, and it was early morning, and it was a pretty good volume bugle, but he was just telling us where he's at. And then daylight broke, and he just shut up, and we're like, what's going on? And so we knew exactly which drainage he was in, so we went down in there anyways. And then as we got closer, we're still making all these loud bugles and cow calls, and then we hear something walking. And so we set up quickly. And then we see that it was a bull. And as he's coming into us, and this is probably like 10 in the morning now, and he just looks at us. We didn't shoot him. He comes into about 20 yards away, and he just looks at us and just basically gave us a whisper bugle. And it was just like, oh, like he's like, here. And that was when the wolf population started escalating. And so I was just like, okay, at night when it's still dark out, they're vocal. Daytime, because they don't want to give their position or tell their other predators with that, their attitudes have changed to very light communication or almost mute communication. Okay. I had to change up my attitude and behavior in that hunting area to adjust to the elk, and that's what I learned, by knowing all these calls, and hearing these calls. You can learn to adjust your volume to that attitude of the elk in that area. So that's probably when you're calling too much, is when you know that the elk are not responding. You can see them, and you're just sitting there blowing. Hopefully they give you a response. But no, it's because they have had some type of pressure to make them act that way. So you have to close the distance and act like an elk that wants to join them, that herd, in that manner or in that attitude or in that behavior. That's one reason bugling too much is too much. So another scenario where bugling too much is when you can see the elk out of bow range and under 80 yards. Let's say that. So out of bow range for me is 40 yards. Okay. So if you can see the elk and they can see the specific area where you're at, and you make that call and they can look over and not see anything over there, you're making too many calls. Okay, so it's okay to sit there and just watch them for, if the wind's right, so until you can move closer and make the right call to make that bull come in and investigate you. So again, in my previous video, I talked about decoys. So if you have a decoy up, okay, and I've done this on wide open hillsides. So I've directed elk herds off private onto public, and I only had one decoy up, but because while they're grazing coming up, they kept on seeing the decoy, and the elk sound still coming from that direction. They kept on grazing, coming up. They'd look up, check that elk is still there. They kept coming up, and they got all around us and just bedded down for like an hour. When you have a decoy up where they can see for hundreds of yards, and if they don't see you as the hunter or the caller or the human figure, and that decoy is giving them comfort, they'll come in. Not calling enough. Okay, so if you have a very excited elk there and he's telling you where he's at, and you're just afraid to make a call, you're not making enough calls, communicating in the right manner to the elk. So that's when you're not making enough calls.